Ay, ganito.
Manila, the heart of the Philippines, is longing to have you back. We search for your wandering gaze inside our museums and your curious steps through our historical streets. We look for your merry smiles as you eat and shop, and your laughter is a sound we long to hear once more. Hopefully soon, the city of Manila misses you. As the world awakens from the slumber brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, we eagerly prepare for your return, launching projects that highlight safety, cleanliness, and most of all, the beauty that the city inherently exudes. Our dream is to welcome you to a Manila that has spent much time in heightening its existing tourist experience, to give our visitors a visual access to the rich art and cultural heritage of the city. Street clearing has been actively pursued. A pedestrian-friendly city awaits as wider sidewalks and green spaces are being built alongside enlivened parks and greenways. Tourism events are continuously launched with the kickoff of the Restaurant Week, which aims to give emphasis to the gastronomical adventure when one visits Manila, as it boasts of a diverse palette brought about by the various cultures residing in the city. From the authentic Chinese food in Binondo to the street food of Ugbo and Endaya, and just recently, within Bonifacio Shrine, beside the newly installed Berlin Wall, is the newly launched Cafe Tolio, a coffee haven. All these are being achieved while the city adheres to the health and safety protocols that have been set by the World Health Organization. Face masks and face shields must be worn at all times, while protective health habits such as proper hand washing, the use of sanitizing alcohol, and social distancing are strictly followed. Manila is a beautiful home enveloped with the warmth of its people, teeming with palpable pride, unforgettable hospitality, and resilience through any form of adversity. This strength, witnessed by its long and colorful history, pushed us to rise with courage, faith, and hope. Even in the midst of a challenging economic period, Manila is ready. See you soon.
In the last 500 years, Filipinos have fought for freedom, unity, and equality. We have made our mark in many fields, from science and medicine to culture and the arts. We are beacons of creativity, resourcefulness, resiliency, and compassion. In 2021, the Filipino people will join the world in commemorating one of the greatest achievements of mankind, the first circumnavigation of the world. We celebrate this historic achievement by bannering an important message. Over adversity and struggles, we shall triumph, putting humanity first, always.
Bisitahin natin ang Manila, damang kapanatagan at pagmamahalan. Ito ay bahagi ng aming tanging yaman, sa lugar na sagana sa kultura at kasaysayan.
Tuloy po kayo magalak sa aming hinanda, sa pagdating sa lungin ng hanggang ng Manila.
Pagmasdan ang lungsod niya, may malasakit at patungo sa pagpunla. O Manila, ningning at sentro ng Pilipinas, sigaw sa mundo, taglay nitong kagandahan. Welcome po kayo sa Manila.
Here we go! Unite together, bringing hope to a country, we call it Manila. Matayog ang pangarap, ako at ikaw, parang magagarang gusali na natatanaw. Bawat misyon at mithiin, bahagi ng kasaysayan ng mundo sa Pilipinas. Hayag na sa ibang bayan, tuklasin ang kasaysayan, sadyang nakakahalina sa lugar na makulay. Welcome po sa Manila.
Tuloy po kayo magalak sa aming hinanda, sa pagdating sa lubungin ang ganda ng Manila.
Ibarin ang takot sa iyong damdamin, ipamalas ang angking galing.
Tumayong mong tapang harapin ng buhay, yakapin ang tagumpay.
Tulungan ang kapwa at bigyang halaga, wag hatakin ng pababa.
Isipin wag sana ang sarili lang, pakisama't bayanihan.
Subukan nating isulong at ligawan ang
Magandang bukas, ikaw at ako magkasama tayo, salubungin ang kinabukasan.
Welcome everyone. Before we start, let us first give reverence to the flag as we sing the Philippine National Anthem together. Right, so welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the Araw ng Maynila lecture series. Now, this episode is extra special because true to the name of the lecture series, today is finally Manila Day or Araw ng Maynila. This webinar, of course, is brought to you by the City of Manila, by the National Quincentennial Committee, by the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, as well as the Intramuros Administration, with the support of the Department of Education, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and of course, this is your host, Rancho Arcilla, from the Intramuros Administration. And as we go through this session, please be reminded that questions and comments are welcome, so they are encouraged. So if you are viewing via Zoom, there's a chat button below or a Q&A button below the screen. Feel free to pin your questions. Or if you are viewing via Facebook Live right now, you can also key in your questions in the comment section below. And then later we can go through them during the open forum. Now, to introduce the speaker. So for this fourth episode of the Araw ng Manila series, we have Dr. Jose Victor Torres. He is a multi-awarded writer, Palangka award-winning playwright, and essayist. He has an MA and a PhD in history from the University of Santo Tomas. He is currently a full professor at the De La Salle University, where he's also the associate director for drama and history at its Bienvenido and Santos Creative Writing Center. As a former researcher for the Intermountain Administration, his book, Ciudad Morada, won the National Book Award for Travel Writing in 2006. And in 2017, his collection of essays, To the Person Sitting in Darkness and Other Footnotes in Philippine History, was awarded the National Book Award for Essays in English. He is the author and editor of books on Philippine history and culture and a contributor of articles on history and culture to local magazines and journals. All right, so without further ado, I would now like to call on Dr. Victor Torres for his presentation.
Sir? Hi, Rancho. Good morning. And magandang umaga po sa ating lahat na ngayon nag-attend ngayon itong webinar na ito. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to request the audience to devote a moment of silence, okay, for the passing of our former president, Benigno Aquino III, and additional prayers and blessings for our newly installed Archbishop of Manila, Cardinal Advincula. Let us hope that this 450th celebration of the foundation of the city of Manila it is already a historic one because of the events that are happening, but hopefully it would be just more than sad or happy events or religious events, but it should also be an event of learning or being part of the historic events that will be happening today for the history of the founding of Manila. Okay. Before I start, I will open my slide presentation for all of you. Okay. I'd like to, while I'm doing this, I'd like to thank the National Centennial Commission and the Tremulous Administration and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and other related agencies who made this webinar possible. Okay, I hope that we can all see the slide now. The color green in background. Okay. Now, before I start, I'd like to ask the audience to imagine Manila or imagine the history of Manila. I do not want this webinar to be just a lecture of facts, a list of facts, and a list of events, and so on and so forth. But I'd like the audience to enjoy this webinar because we are trying to look at the history of Manila now from a very different point of view. You have been treated to a lot of facts, to a lot of sharing, to a lot of opinions as provided by our other speakers who have gone through this webinar. Mine is the fourth, and we'll have perhaps the last one in the afternoon with my colleague and one of my favorite historians, Dr. Ambet Ocampo. My lecture today is about the history of Manila, but looking at it at a very different angle. The title of my lecture is Manila, the Rise of Ciudad Morada from Lumang Maynila. It is a history of Manila, but I am going to try to at least clear up some confusing notions, some unknown facts, and other trivia that you may have encountered in the history of Manila. Okay? Today, we celebrate the 450 years of the founding of the capital city of the Philippines. It has been more than 450 years of the story of a city on whose beginnings encompasses the story of an entire nation. What do I mean by this? Look into your history textbooks. And in the first chapters of the Spanish colonial era, you would see that everything is focused on Manila. No? The economy, the galleon trade, so on and so forth. This came from much of this came from the city of Manila. It was only much later, at least more than 100 years later, that the religious and economic and other cultural influences and expansions would happen all over the Philippines. But at the start of everything was focused on Manila. As I say here, one only has to look into the text of every history textbook through the years in order to realize that the beginnings, or what they call the embryo, of our colonial history begins with Manila. For Manila was the center of the Spanish colonial system, not only in the Philippines, but of the Spanish Empire in Asia. So, knowing the story of Manila means knowing the beginnings of our national history. Narrating Manila, telling the history of our past. What you see in that picture is Intramuros in 1935. Of course, there were already airplanes at the time, and you can see the city as it continuously modernized while retaining its old look. You can see the golf course, the areas that were clean. You can see Fort Santiago at the bottom of the picture. And of course, the wide expanse of the Pasig River. Now, the best way to tell history is tell its story. Kwento. Tama na sa eskwela natin yung mga memorization ng facts. Una-una, you can get a story by just memorizing names, by just memorizing dates, by just memorizing places. But you have to put them all together in order to see the story. Sikat na sikat sa atin ngayon yung mga Korean drama, o kaya yung mga 13 sa animation and everything. But if you look at it in a way, all the Korean dramas are only given to you in names of places. You think you will have a story? So what am I saying here? We have to look beyond our history as a list of facts. We have to look at our history as a story, cuento. And in order to do this, you have to ask yourself why and how, and look at the trivia. Look at the small things. Now, a word about trivia. Trivia is not bad because trivia attracts listeners. It is the spice of historical narration. But, as I say here, narrators must be careful in using it. Hindi pwedeng lahat ay trivia na. Walang mangyayari sa buhay natin pag pala trivia lang lahat. No? They must not divert their listeners or readers from the fact na may substance yung kinikwento o sinasabi ng nagre-recite o yung nagkikwento o yung nagsusulat. Dahil kahit may trivia, kailangan ang sinasabi nila ay ang katotohanan sa ating kasaysayan. Kaya ang isang mabuting kwento ng kasaysayan ay ipaghalo ang general history sa trivia. Mga maliliit na kwento lamang, pambuhay ng interest sa mga taong nakikinig o nagbabasa ng kasaysayan. So simulan natin ang kwento ng Maynila. The Manila of the first topic is the Manila of yesteryears, or leading to the Manila of today. Intramuros was the Manila during the Spanish period. Pag sinabi mong Maynila o Manila nung panahon ng Kastila at nung early part ng panahon ng Amerikano, Manila only meant one thing, Intramuros. Yung ibang areas ng panahon ng Kastila, ang tawag nila dyan, Arabales. Yung Sampaloc, Tondo, Binondo, San Nicolas, Pandacan, Paco, Santa Ana, Ermita, Malate, Quiapo, and Santa Cruz, ito yung mga modern districts ngayon ng City of Manila. Pero nung unang panahon, arabales ang mga tawag dito. Parang mga town provinces ng syudad. Ang syudad mismo ay Intramuros. So the entire capital was within the walls of Intramuros. The city was, as you all know, sinasabi ito sa mga facts ng Intramuros, the city was pentagonal in shape with a land area of 64 hectares beside the Pasig River in southern Manila. Can you imagine a capital city of an empire with a land area only of 64 hectares? Masasabi natin ito, kingdom, 64 hectares lang. Why? There were two Manilas during the Spanish period. Yung Ciudad de Manila, which was Intramuros, was the capital. Yung Provincia de Manila was the arrabales or the outlying towns. Provincia de Manila extended as far as Rizal and south in Parañaque. Okay? Pero nag-iba ang itsura ng capital city of Manila during the American period. Because when the American period arrived, the Americans with all this grandiose idea of a new colony that they wanted to put together could not be satisfied with a capital city that is only 64 hectares. So what did they do? They now passed a law in which they created what they called the new city charter that would later create the new city of Manila, with the boundaries very much extended. It is now about the boundary of Sampaloc, the boundary south until the boundary of Pasay. Then, of course, east and west, leading, of course, east was already, east was heading towards Rizal. Then, of course, west, there was Manila Bay. Lumaki yung boundaries. What happened to Intramuros? Well, sad to say, Intramuros now became a capital city that was reduced to a mere district. Kaya ito yung if you've seen the play or read Portrait of an Artist as Filipino, kung saan niluluksa yung dalawang characters doon yung deterioration ng grandiosity of what was once Intramuros. Okay, so the capital city of Manila was Intramuros at that time. Can you imagine an entire capital of an empire in the land area that was small, yet rolling over islands in what is today parts of the Southeast Asian region? Because remember, the Spanish missions, especially the Catholic missions, did not just include the Philippines. It included other areas as far as Vietnam, as far as Taiwan. Yet these are all ruled over by a city and a capital that is only 64 hectares. Such an impossible thing to imagine, yet true. So let's go to Lumang Maynila, Old Manila. I'm not talking about the Spanish. No, I'm talking about pre-colonial Manila. The original name of the native settlement was Maynila, hindi Maynilad, as it was commonly believed. Well, I think from my initial research that I already made, it seems that Maynila was came from the plant, of the mangrove plant that Ixara Manila, named by Father Manuel Blanco. And he mentions, of course, in his Flora de Filipinas that it was the name that Maynila was based on. No? Later researches by historians like Teodoro Agoncillo, who was also a Tagalog linguist, and writer Abe Cruz, Aguilar Cruz, pointed out that the nuances of the Tagalog language does not remove the last consonant when you want to shorten or lengthen words. They do not remove single letters. They usually move syllables. So illogical yung Maynilad tapos all of a sudden magiging Maynila na lang siya. Pero at ang karagdagang fact na sinabi nila, meron talagang nila. Nila was a plant that refers to a plant that was used to make indigo, that blue dye that is a part of the industry of the pre-colonial Filipinos. And the area of the settlement of Maynila was a popular place for the selling of indigo. Kaya ang naging pangalan niya ay Maynila. Nila also has another name. It was called Tayum, which is you can hear this name in other parts of the in the Philippines where the indigo industry was developed. But we also had a place within Manila, no? And this was, of course, the area we call now today Tayuman, referring, of course, to indigo. So remember, no? Maynila, it is no longer Maynilad. It has always been Maynila. Maynila was the center of a large market of foreign and local products. Most of these were from China and other Southeast Asian countries were traded. It was also the center of trade in Luzon at that time. Malaki Maynila noon. Just a bit of a background here. I'm using the painting Filipino Struggles Through History by Carlos Botong Francisco. No, I'm using only the first part because the first part, as mentioned a while ago in our history, talks about Manila. But we are also talking about the entire history of the Philippines dun sa mural painting. But the first part, as I said, is the history of Manila. So you have Chinese jugs coming here. You have Indian traders coming here, so on and so forth. No? And of course, the common marketplace for the Chinese traders, no, where they would usually sell the products, was called Iparian or Ipadian. Now, contrary to some belief that Parian was a Spanish word, it is not. It's a local Tagalog term. No? Parian, it even appears in our local Tagalog vocabularies. How big was Maynila? In his research on the pre-colonial civilization of Manila, historian William Henry Scott said the original Maynila was from Fort Santiago until the area of what is today the pamantasan ng lungsod ng Maynila. Ang tanong, was it pentagonal? No? At first, it was believed that it may have been pentagonal, no? But in the early 1980s, the UP Archaeological Society, Archaeological Studies, headed by Dr. Victor Paz, made some archaeological diggings in the river bank of the Pasig area, the Pasig River area, no? Kung saan yung area ng Puerto de Santa Isabel, and of course where Letran is now, no? Unfortunately, after doing some archaeological diggings in the area, they could not find any evidence that there was a civilization in that area. Meaning, mukhang walang itinayo doon. Mukhang hindi yung bahagi ng settlement. Why? Well, probably it was because it was partly small islands of the river. And as we all know, this is also mentioned in the Spanish religious chronicles, it's a swamp area. We have a picture of it. No, ito yung legendary painting ng Old Intramuros from a lid of a Mexican chest. No, yung baul. Nasa ilalim to ng cover. You can see on the lower right, the area of what is today Letran is an island. No, and of course, you can see some small islands there along the Pasig River. It's on the right side, ano? And of course, it would be much later that the area would be filled in and construction of churches and other structures will be done there. However, since it has been a swamp area before, it is the very same reason that until today, that area of Intramuros always floods. The rulers, of course, of Maynila were, as we all know, Raha Soliman, who ruled over Maynila. He was the nephew of Raha Ache, also known as Ladyang Matanda, who was the earlier ruler of Manila. So basically, when the Spaniards arrived, Manila had two rulers. No, Ladyang Matanda, or Raha Ache, and of course, the new ruler, Raha Soliman. That's why ang tawag kay Raha Soliman, Rahang Mura. And Raha Ache was Rahang Matanda. And of course, there was Sibunao Lakandula, who was the ruler of Tondo. Okay? And all of them are related. That's one of the things. So it was one big dynasty ruling that area of Manila. When the Spaniards arrived in the area, they were already working on a settlement in Cebu, but apparently Legazpi had a bad encounter with the Portuguese, of whom these Europeans were already making trade in the area of southern Philippines, especially in the Visayas region. So Legazpi eventually had to abandon Cebu, and he had to move to a new settlement on Panay. It was on Panay that he would eventually hear reports of a very rich settlement, no, in the northern area of what is now part of Luzon. And he got these reports from many of the Chinese traders who were doing trade with Maynila. So what did he do? He sent now his like a right-hand man or co-commander of the expedition, Martin de Goiti, to go and inspect this so-called settlement. The word that was used was kingdom, of which was very rich from, he said, because of the centralization of trade. However, this inspection would cause now a massive upheaval in our history. The arrival of the Spaniards spelled the doom for Maynila. What is seldom mentioned in Manila's history is that it was destroyed twice. First, by the attack of Martin de Goiti. Martin de Goiti had at least some good relations with the first two elders of the area, Lakandula and of course Raha Matanda. It was Soliman who was suspicious. Now, namanghaba sila Lakandula at sila Matanda kay Martin de Goiti. I think hindi sila na mangha, because it was believed that they were probably already doing trade with some Europeans. Remember, the area was already being visited by the Portuguese. But this suspicions, of course, of Soliman would eventually come to a disastrous end when it was during their stay in the area of Maynila, that a cannon shot, which was a signal for a greeting for the Spaniards, was mistaken by Soliman for a attack. And he proceeded now to attack the Spaniards, and eventually the Spanish soldiers retaliated and destroyed Maynila. What happened next, of course, was that de Goiti would have easily taken over the area, but he knew that he only had several men with him. He eventually abandoned the place, returned to Palay Island, and reported the matter to Legazpi. Legazpi was heartened by the news and realized, of course, that maybe Maynila was a more secure place to have than Cebu or Panay. And eventually, he moved down the colony, or his planned colony, to Maynila. Now, this happened mga at least 1 or 2 years later. No? And when they finally arrived there, Soliman, who had already rebuilt Maynila, saw the arrival again of the Spaniards, and realizing, of course, that there might be another conflict that was going to happen, he burned the entire settlement and fled to Tondo, to his relative Banaw Lacandula. Eventually, Legazpi, who had always played a quote-unquote diplomatic role as a Spanish conquistador, managed to enter into settlements with the three rulers of Maynila. But the objectives of the Spaniards of colonizing the Philippines was eventually revealed by their actions. No? And there was, of course, later resistance by what has been known in our history as the unknown warrior of Macabebe in Pampanga. I'm not going to talk about the unknown warrior, because this has been a very well done research work by NHCP researcher Ian Alfonso, and it has gained a large following, that led to the putting up of a monument to the warrior of the first resistance against Spanish rule. But of course, until today, there is still some researches trying to being done. For one thing, we really have to know kung sino ba talaga yung pangalan, kasi we encountered a lot of names. There was, of course, the Tariq Soliman, of which my later research would prove that it was a fake name by Pedro Paterno. So it is still very much debate what was his real name. Okay? We all know the story as provided by the earlier lectures by Mr. Alfonso, and of course later by Xiao Chua. No? And the warrior laid down his challenge for the Spaniards by saying that let us meet and fight at the Bangkusay Channel. Now here was a problem. Where was Bangkusay? Now, when I wrote the research work to identify to prove that the Tariq Soliman character was fake by Pedro Paterno, I looked at the text of the challenge that was laid down by the warrior. May the sun part my body in the middle, and may I be disgraced in the eyes of my women. Who would detest me if any time I will be a friend of the Spaniards? Then he would jump out of the window and say that he is expecting them at the mouth of the Bangkusay Channel. My problem here was that I had looked at several old maps. I probably haven't seen everything. I could not find Bangkusay Channel. In the more detailed map of Father Jose Alge, you can see here the areas of Navotas, Bulacan, and Manila. Manila is on the southern part. Then you have Navotas here. Then you have the Bulacan, and of course the areas of Pampanga on the upper left. Okay. Tondo is the one near the almost at the bottom. Okay. Now, here was the problem. There is no Bangkusay mentioned here. Ayan. Navotas is there. No, you can see Malabon. And you can see the channels that crossed into the areas of Tondo. Yet, there is no Bangkusay. And this is the water part. They will do the water part of Tondo. My theory was that Bangkusay was probably a part of the Barra de Vitas, which is of course the opening of the Navotas, what is now the part of the Navotas Malabon River. How did the name disappear? I don't know. Yet. No. I would like to probably think that it was probably a condemned place that eventually the Spaniards would move to eradicate its name. But here is a interesting thing, no? There was a street before named Bangkusay in Tondo. It is mentioned in street maps as part of Tondo. But as a river, a waterway or part of the river, it's not mentioned at all. Unless probably there will be an existing document that will pop up. No? And even today, the street called Bangkusay is no longer in existence. It is now called F. Barola Street. Although recently, the NHCP placed a marker in the area to commemorate the Battle of Bangkusay. Now, founding Manila. And this is still part of the painting, no, of Carlos Botong Francisco. We have always read in our history books that Manila had been founded by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. But the question is, what was the ceremony like? We have always seen in TV, mga TV movies or movies, that's showing when Christopher Columbus landed in South America. They would put up a cross. They would read a scroll and said, "I hereby name this area San Salvador as in honor of the Lord, the Savior Jesus Christ." The question is, was there a prescribed ritual for the foundation of a city? That question would remain hanging, or even would that be noticed, no? Until in the early 1980s, when the Augustinian researcher of the Intramuros administration, Father Father Luis Merino, no, would discover a document that was the prescription as provided by the Council of Indies for the foundation of cities. And there was a ritual, surprisingly. Here's this description as provided. The commander of the colonizers would select a spot and had a hole dug deep for a tree trunk to be buried in and leave a protruding section around 1.4 to 1 meters high. It was then lowered into the hole with the help of the natives. Then the commander, in this case, if this is Manila, it would be Legazpi, will drive a knife into the trunk and turn to his audience, composed of natives, of course, and the Spanish colonists, and announce in a loud voice, "Gentlemen, soldiers, and comrades, and all others who witness this, here I set gallows and sword, and found and placed," using an example, the city of Manila, kasi it was a basic formula, "which may God keep long years, reserving the right to move it to any other site that might prove more convenient. In this city I cause to be in the name of the King, and in his name I will defend it and will maintain peace and justice with all the Spaniards, conquistadores, citizens, residents, and strangers, with all the natives meting justice alike, to the rich, to the poor, to the lowly, to the high, and protecting the widows and orphans." Mahaba pa yan. No? The commander then would draw his sword and made a wide clearing of the people. Di ba? Siga pa siya noon. And as he shouted a challenge, "If there be any here who would challenge this, let him come forward and out with me to the open field." Challenge of duel, no? "Where I will measure my sword with his. And this I swear, for I intend to die defending this city, now or whenever, keeping it for the King my Lord and his captain, servant, and subject, and as a gentleman born." And he would recite this 3 times. And if there is no challenge, the colonists, the Spaniards, would respond that the city is well founded. Long live the King and our Lord. Of course, syempre, pag maintindihan ng mga natives, baka tanong nila, mga siraud itong mga to. No? But there was a translator who would translate it for them. No? Now, I've always wondered about this translator, who would translate for the natives, because who would translate for them? Unless this formula would come later, when communication has been well established among the natives and the Spaniards. After reciting the ritual, the commander then slashed at the surrounding plants, saying that he is placing the city under the authority of the audiencia or the governor, and that he is making it its capital. A sword is then planted on the site of the planned church. The mass is said by the priest. The ceremony is then is ended with a salvo from the canons and celebration. Now, look carefully at the description, that he is placing the city under the authority of the audiencia. This has always been the contention or debate among the questionable dates of the founding of the city of Manila. It has been established that it was June 24, because at that time, the audiencia or the city government was already existing. And that is the basis for the June 24 date of the creation of the city of Manila. And that, my friends, is the ritual for the foundation of a city. Can you imagine that said in very classical Spanish, where the natives in awe with the power that is being portrayed here, or would they just accept it as something as part of their friendship with the Spaniards? The city of Manila would continue, would be built, and would begin as the same features of the Maynila settlement, which is a city surrounded by palisades, coconut trunks, and of course that had cannons and lantakas provided by the natives. But it wasn't secure, especially in 1574, when the Chinese corsair Lima Hong attacked the city of Manila and almost destroyed it before they were eventually driven off. The Spaniards were caught unprepared for it, but they already had an inkling of what would happen, because the Chinese had already landed in Parañaque at that time. The problem that they had was that there was not enough soldiers in the city, because most of them were out in the provinces already exploring areas. Even Juan de Salcedo, who would eventually drive off the Chinese from the Manila capital, would arrive late and would eventually find the city almost destroyed before he managed to drive the Chinese away. There was one part of the story of the Lima Hong attack that is mentioned in some of the chronicles, but it came out quite prominently here in the Botong mural. You can see it in the upper left side. This was the death of Martin de Goiti. De Goiti was killed during the Lima Hong attack. Now, why? How did it happen? It was said that his house was located near the boundary of Manila, where PLM was. E di siyempre, nung sinugod na sila ng mga Inchik, he was among the first to die. Although he defended his home quite well, but he was already old at that time. He was already in his 70s. And was eventually killed. Now, here was the curious thing. According to the account, de Goiti's wife was there. No? And I've always been puzzled by it, because in some accounts they said she was a Spaniard, asawa ni de Goiti. But I had to ask my colleague Alberto Campo, posible na ba na mayroong colonist at that time, 2 years after the foundation of Manila? We do not know. Because it would take 1 year and a half before the first galleon would sail and return with the first colonists. So, ibig sabihin, yung first galleon that arrived before May Galena, before 1574, and that made the trip and came back with de Goiti's wife. The other possibility is that it was probably a native Filipino, yung asawa niya. No? What is known is that after de Goiti was killed, his wife, the description, of course, was Minolestia. But of course, we all know what happened. She may have been raped and eventually killed by the Chinese. The continuous threats of invasion and disasters would lead now to the realization by the Spaniards that they had to defend or make the city, which is the capital of their empire, secure. And this led now to the creation of what we know today as the Ciudad Morada, or the walled city. The description of an American historian during the 1930s would say, at this time, Manila was constantly open to not only attacks by Chinese and Japanese pirates, but by Portuguese forces jealous of Spanish successes as a rival in Oriental trade, and by English freebooters. This was already in the 18th century, and were already begin to prey upon Portuguese and merchant ships. But as early as the 17th century, there was the late 16th century, there was already consideration if it is better to secure the city by building it in the only material that would make it secure, stone. And so the plan to build the walls would happen. No, it would definitely be a government project, Spanish colonial government project, after 20 years after the foundation of Manila. But as early as the 1580s, there was already a plan to secure the city using stone. The walls of Intramuros were starting to be built in 1593. The stones that were used was adobe, or volcanic tufa. This is common in the history of Intramuros, which were mined from Guadalupe, in Makati. You can still see actually the hills of Guadalupe. That's made out of volcanic tufa. If you cross the bridge, the Guadalupe Bridge in EDSA, where the San Carlos Seminary is, volcanic tufa yon. And of course, part of it was mined from Bulacan. So by the 18th century, the city was surrounded by a wall. And as mentioned in the common histories of Intramuros, it would be known as Intramuros within the walls. And within those walls would the Spanish Empire develop. But what were the walls even before volcanic tufa was used? These were the early plans for Intramuros. And this was already, adobe was already being used here. This was Intramuros after the some of the buildings in the 18th century, 17th century. The idea of what would probably be the first structures of Intramuros in stone can be found in the southwest corner of Intramuros. And this was the circular structure that was found in the early 1980s and eventually became a project of the National Museum with the Intramuros administration. And this was a huge circular structure found inside Baluarte de San Diego. What was curious about the structure was that it was well made. There were steps, there were doors, there were floorings. There probably was a second or third floor. Now, because what we have right now is just part of the ground floor. Now, the first definite studies that were made about the structure was done by then Intramuros administration consultant, architect Isabel P. Cornell. The earlier guesses for the structure was that it was a water cistern. But architect Lilo would eventually submit a report about the structure saying, we are dealing with a structure that has undergone several phases of construction. This is still in the finish of the walls because the walls were made partly of brick and stone. And the lack of continuity in the architectural character of the building. Why is she saying this? It was because different materials were used. And the fact that apparently the materials that were used were not solid enough because apparently the circular structure sank to the level where we know it today. Discounting the theories as to what it may have been converted into in later years, because as I said, it was later determined that it might have been a water cistern. Our main interest lay in the original purpose of the building. As she narrated later in her report, my father, the late Pedro P. Cornel, who was also a friend of the Intramuros administration, a great man and a great researcher, had a copy of the book Arquitectura Española en Filipinas by the Spanish author Diaz Trachuelo. Okay. I was trying to figure out what the remains of the circular structure within Baluarte de San Diego were. My father suggested I refer to the book, which is, of course, the studies of the walls and fortifications of Intramuros. The book became invaluable. It provided me with background on the early stone structures in Intramuros and the effort by a Jesuit priest, Father Antonio Cedeño, who was using and designing and using the fortifications for Intramuros and building them in stone. Okay. And it is mentioned in the document, in the Arquitectura, that years later, during the governorship of Don Santiago de Vera, the first stone fort in the city was erected. It was named Fort Nuestra Senora de Guia. The documents that were found on Nuestra Senora de Guia gave several kinds of details, including the location of how close the structure was to the convent of the San Agustin Church and convent. What was more of also a jackpot was that the description or the plan included a sketch which showed a circular structure similar to the one found in the Baluarte de San Diego. Including the letters and the design and, of course, the cost of the fort by Santiago de Vera to the king. It was called Fort Nuestra Senora de Guia. And this fort would appear later in several plans upon the construction of the walls of Intramuros. Apparently, Nuestra Senora de Guia was abandoned, yet it was incorporated when Baluarte de San Diego was built and designed and later built. In fact, the structure could be seen in several photographs of Baluarte de San Diego in the 1930s. Here's the structure. The structure was already buried. And a different military structure was built on the Baluarte de San Diego. Okay, you can see it here. The flag is where Nuestra Senora de Guia was. And it was only much later that it was dug up. And now it is a tourist attraction in Intramuros. Histories and stories continue to abound in the narrative of our nation. And it is only in realizing these stories, whether it's trivia or not, and in seeing that these stories are linked to each other to give a bigger picture, can we see how our identities as Filipinos began and grew into what we are and what we may be in the future. From Lumang Maynila to Ciudad Morada to Distrito, the district of Intramuros District, to the prime tourist destination in the city of Manila. Thank you and maligayang kaarawan, Maynila.
Maraming salamat po, sir. Thank you, Dr. Torres, for that very interesting presentation po. And I think this is, I think the significant takeaway that we can get from this talk is that as we understand Manila, we also understand the history of the Philippines. And that as we immerse ourselves with the story of this city, we get a fuller and deeper understanding of our nationhood. It's quite interesting to have a webinar with special focus on pre-colonial Manila, especially considering that most of our popular discussions today are focused on the colonial period of the city. And in this webinar, we get a bigger picture of things because colonial Manila is discussed within the context of Lumang Manila. Thank you, sir. Now, everyone, we are opening our open forum, so feel free to ask questions. If you are viewing via Zoom, there's a Q&A and chat button below the screen. And if you are viewing via Facebook Live, we have the comment section. Just key in your questions or comments there. Feel free to raise any concerns, any questions. If you have any point for clarification, please do, so that we can raise them on air in this webinar. Sir, thank you, sir, for discussing the overview of pre-colonial Manila. And just to start the question portion of this webinar, most literature today would refer to Manila as a kingdom. Of course, this is just a matter of translation. But do you think this translation is accurate?
Yeah, I've always considered that. That's why you notice I keep saying settlement only when I'm referring to Maynila. No? But probably it was a kingdom, but because of our classic understanding, no, of a ruler, of a datu, of a raha, so on and so forth. No, we are always trying to relate it to something grandiose. I'm not maligning or minamaliit ko na ay ganyan lang naman ang Maynila, no? But if you look at almost all of our historical sources, no, it is always mentioned as a settlement. No, probably because it may or may not have been that permanent, no. But riverine settlements were permanent because it's the source of livelihood of a lot of the old areas, no. But the one that I definitely saw as considered as a kingdom, not a settlement, was Namayan, which is now Namayan and Tondo, not Maynila. No, Tondo was considered like a kingdom, probably because of its size and its population, and even the old kingdom of Namayan, which is now Santa Ana. No? But I seldom saw Maynila referred to as a kingdom. No, probably because I'd like to think of it as probably a satellite of the bigger kingdoms. No, but eventually, this small kingdom of Manila would eventually end up as the premier capital, the site of the premier capital of the city.
Now, considering that the demonym Manileño is modern and Spanish, what do you think did the original residents or citizens call themselves?
Tagalogs. They call themselves Tagalogs.
Okay. Thank you, sir. You mentioned earlier that Maynila became Maynila and would eventually become Intramuros. Now, do we have data on when the term Intramuros first came into use?
Actually, transitions into names are not easily determined, no? But definitely we could say that the word Intramuros began when the walls were already up, no? But the transition from Maynila to Manila is very vague, no? Because if you look at the later some of the Spanish documents of the era, some of the Spaniards were still using Maynila. But eventually, many of them would use Manila, removing now the Y, and some would eventually also use Manila, double L. But eventually, I think that because of this evolution of what the city would be called, eventually it became stuck to the word talaga, Manila. Now, because we all know that the native name was Maynila. I think the importance of using also the native the old name became part of our formation of nationalism. That it was, of course, Maynila, but we aren't referring to the settlement anymore. We're referring to the entire city, which minala siguro sila na niretain yung pangalan ng Manila, di ilang kinlalate, di Maynila, sa atin pa rin yan.
How about, sir, the term Intramuros? When did it first came into use?
I think Intramuros came about when the walls were finished. And the decentralization of power eventually would happen. No, because it's kind of hard to say Intramuros without a wall, no? Because you're saying within the walls, no? But I think it was more or less used when I have no definite date for it. I would be glad if I could see a document that would officially name, no, Intramuros. But I always saw was Manila, no. That would eventually change that. I don't think the name was changed into Intramuros. I think for me, Intramuros was more of a like a colloquial term or a descriptive term lang. No, kasi Ciudad Murada, they don't officially call Manila Ciudad Murada. No, they call it Manila pa rin. No, so I seldom see documents by Spanish documents where it is mentioned as Intramuros. It is usually Manila that is mentioned. No.
Salamat, sir. We have a question from Arnold Adraneda. So, from Arnold, ano po naging relasyon, political, economical at social ng Maynila sa mga karatig na lugar? Paano ito nakapag-ambag sa pagkabuo ng mga lugar bilang komunidad o lipunan?
Oh, as I said in my lecture, no, and of course it's written in the histories of Manila, Intramuros was the center. It was the center of religious power. It was the center of economic power. It was the center of education. Every student who wanted to have higher education goes to Manila. No? Yung mga secondary schools medyo lumaki lang konti because they started putting up secondary schools in the provinces. But the university was still located in Manila. So every student who wanted to attain a higher education would go to Manila in order to become part. Oh, just to give you an example, no, if you look at the lists, no, of the delegates of the Malolos Congress, no, you would be quite shocked that most of them were graduates from the University of Santo Tomas, no, in Manila. So it means that more or less these people became quote-unquote Manileños because they took a presidency in Manila to study. Now that's for education. What about trade? Before the opening of the Philippines to world trade, where the ports, international ports, were created now in Pangasinan, in Iloilo, no, in other areas, everything was centered on Manila. So from Manila, it became now the distribution point to the local provinces. No? Now, how did it relate to the population? Well, the population wasn't how can I describe it? The population, of course, in relation to the urban life, was determined also by the economic stature because of the work that was available, you know, and of course the education that was available to these people. The questionable narrative that the schools that were put up, you know, like the University of Santo Tomas, were severely limited to non-Filipinos. That's ridiculous. Because if it was only just limited to Spaniards, then the university would have closed down because there was very few Spaniards at that time, no, who would become educated. Most of them are studying it abroad. No? So who would the university and schools cater to? They would cater to Filipinos. Okay. Now about religion, well, Manila was the center of religion. There's no denial about that. Okay. But then again, everything that emanated, missionary work, cultural work by religious, emanated from Manila. So ang ganda na, malaki ang relasyon talaga ng Maynila. Kasi everything at that time, unfortunately, was centralized in the city.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from... Now, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi can be considered a divisive figure because he can either be seen as a colonizer or as a founder. Now, we have a question from Lexi Reyes. Should we offer wreaths to Legazpi in recognition of his founding of the city? What are your thoughts on this?
I don't see anything wrong with that. Because he did found the city.
Thank you, sir.
Now, if you can probably locate the tomb of Ra Soliman, you can probably also lay a wreath there. But in this case, Legazpi was the founder of the city. No? Here is probably one of the things that you should remember. Our history is a colonial history. You cannot remove that. If you want to remove anything that is colonial about it, transform every stone church in the Philippines into a nipa hut. Because those are colonial remnants. Remove everything that is colonial in your cuisine, because most of our cuisine today was affected by the galleon trade, which is a colonial trade. So if your problem, I'm sorry to be like Mataro or something, but if your problem is laying a wreath to a Spanish founder of the city, it's fine with me. But we also lay wreaths in Jose Rizal. Even the Spaniards lay a wreath on. Even the Spaniards lay a wreath on Jose Rizal's monument. I don't think they were condemned for that.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, do we have non-Spanish sources on the founding of Manila? There was already a significant number of Chinese traders in the area during that time. Are there any written sources from the Chinese?
We have. That's unfortunately, that's one of the for many, unless you can read Chinese. That's a very rich source of the history of Manila. The Chinese sources. Another rich source of or probably that needs to be researched on is the Portuguese archives, because the Portuguese were in contact with the Visayans and the Filipinos, the early Filipinos, even before the arrival of the Spaniards. So what we have to be we should be probably surprised in what can be found there. The Chinese, it had meron mga histories talaga. And I think, I'm not sure if Bahay Chinoy already had a catalog on the sources that would mention Spanish and Chinese sources on Manila and other areas of the Philippines where the Chinese trade and the Chinese relations would happen.
Thank you, sir. How about, sir, the Imperial Archives of the Ming Dynasty? Was there any effort of going to there by previous researchers?
Sorry, what archives?
The archives of the Ming Dynasty, sir, in Beijing. May effort.
Probably there is. So I like what historians like me would encourage talaga researchers go there to conduct research and not only conduct research there, but to maintain contacts with scholars from those countries. My colleague in the De La Salle University, Dr. Fernando Santiago, is right now doing a study, of course, on the Malay identity with the fellow Indonesian scholars. Asian to, not exactly foreign, but of course Asian. But determining, of course, the Malay identity for the Southeast Asian region. So yeah, if you're interested, probably hopefully when the pandemic ends, that we could easily manage to travel abroad. There are scholarships always available, in which archives would eventually be open to.
It was earlier mentioned that there was a very elaborate ceremony involved in the founding of the city of Manila. Now, do we have any information on the most probable place where the tree trunk was buried during these rites?
I'm sorry, but no, I don't know. I don't know if there's a definite place. No, probably. I could guess. This is only speculative. That it was probably will be put up where the center of the city would probably be. No, and if we look at the center of the city, it will probably be the area where the Manila Cathedral is now. No? Now, that is also a point of clarification, because we have always said that the cross of the Manila Cathedral points to the center of the city of Manila, di ba? What was being referred to as the center of the city of Manila here was Intramuros at that time, not the entire city of Manila. No? Kasi if you try to do that, you will not land in the center of the city. You will just land on the one side of the city. So with the cross, the Manila Cathedral, that I don't know if that is still considered today, were pinpointed, of course, the center of the city, which was Intramuros.
Considering, sir, that the reference material presented earlier on the ceremony was only a prescription, do we have any record that the ceremony actually took place?
Considering the fact that it was written, no, and probably considering the fact it was an official document that was found by Father Merino. Father Merino's theory was that it was the prescription for almost all of the cities, not only in the Philippines, but probably in the other cities that were founded by the Spaniards, not only in Asia, but also in Latin America.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Raul de la Rosa. So aside from the reason for the construction of the walls, the stone walls of Intramuros, how important was the Limahong raids in the development of the city?
Well, the Limahong attack was just one incident of many that would be encountered by the city of Manila. The attacks from foreign invaders were very few and spaced. They didn't come every day. But when the walls were being built, fortifications were, of course, built to protect the walls from whatever attack that may come. But also included with the construction of the fortifications were buildings. Because the number one enemy of Intramuros at that time was fire. Not well, if the fire comes with the enemy, di mas grabe pa yun, They can easily set the city on fire. But the number one enemy of Intramuros at that time was fire. Attacks came later, especially when the galleon trade was in full force. Tipong yumayaman lang yung colony because of the galleon trade. Siyempre, it was attracting foreign invaders.
Thank you, sir. Now, in episode number 2 of the Araw ng Manila lecture series, we had Xiao Chua. And in his presentation, he mentioned that when the Spaniards occupied Manila, the original citizens, the original residents of the city transferred to another place we now call Rizal Park. And it was the reason why it was called Bagong Bayan, meaning new town. Now, do we have any sources for that? Or is that just a theory?
I'm not sure where I saw that, but I know of that alone. That the reason why it was called Bagong Bayan, it was because this is where the residents of all the residents of Manila would eventually transfer. I cannot remember the source at the moment. No, but that was the reason why it was called Bagong Bayan, because it was a new town that was going to be eventually put up for the natives, so the natives of Manila, who were forced to leave when the Spaniards began constructing the walled city. You know, unfortunately, Bagong Bayan would not last very long because it would eventually be demolished during the British invasion. Also. And of course, the demolition of Bagong Bayan would eventually lead to the dispersion now of the native population or the Filipino population of the area.
Thank you, sir. And we now end our open forum. But before we end this question and answer portion, sir, isa pong pang Miss Universe na question. What is your message to the city of Manila this 450 years, year of their foundation?
I have always enjoyed the city of Manila. I mean, I grew up in Manila. I used to live in Blumentritt. No, and before my parents moved out and we moved to Quezon City. However, I spent my college years here and my work years here. I was an employee of the Intramuros administration for almost 20 years, and I'm teaching here in Manila. No, I'm teaching in Manila. I teach at the De La Salle University, and I have seen the continuous, let me say, deterioration and development both at the same time of the city. But what I would like to continuously see, especially in the local government, and I'm probably calling this because my cousin is the assistant of ISCO. He's a former councilor. Let Circle is my cousin. Probably something that we should really value, and I'm sure that Mayor ISCO is doing this. The value of not only preserving our heritage, but preserving a way of life that is adjusting to the modernization of the city that would make us say that we are proud to be Manileño. No matter if you go home to Quezon City, no matter if you just work in Manila, you will be proud to say, no, it is fun to be, I'm proud to be Manileño.
Thank you, sir. Now, that concludes our 4th episode of the Araw ng Maynila series. Now, to promote our next and final episode, this afternoon at 1 p.m., we are having Beto Campo of the Ateneo de Manila University History Department. So this is to conclude our Araw ng Manila lecture series. So his talk will be about Manila in the past tense. So see you later in the final episode of the Araw ng Manila lecture series. Now, thank you so much po, Dr. Victor Torres, and thank you everyone. So see you po mamayang hapon, and mabuhay po ang Maynila.